That'll turn off in literally 60 seconds. So, I'm actually going to do, I saw that there was only one video released today, not two. So, real quick, let's do a reaction to it. I don't have my, what do you call it with me? My tablet. So we're just gonna go, because it's just one video.
So as host of Game Theory, I've been teaching through video games since 2011. But what about just teaching video games? Us older gamers were fortunate enough to start
Also, just for myself, I'm gonna try it at volume 24.
in games when the barrier to entry was much lower than it is today. As I personally grew up, the games and their controls just grew naturally up along with me. My first system was my dad's NES, which meant all I had to wrap my head around were two buttons and directions. If you were to drop a PlayStation 5 controller into the lap of a kid from the 80s and then ask him to play the newest Call of Duty, I guarantee their brain would melt. You have 4 buttons, 2 triggers for each finger, 2 control sticks, a directional pad, a touchpad, and oh yeah, if you push in those sticks, they do something else too. It is no wonder that
Analog sticks. Yeah, I do remember going from a Sega controller to Dreamcast controller to a PlayStation controller. And well, give Sony some credit. They haven't, other than a touchpad, they haven't really changed the PlayStation controller all too much. Still does sense.
there's more and more online discussion happening right now about what gaming is like for non-gamers. But it's not just the controls they have to contend with here. If I were to ask you, what's the first game that you would likely give someone looking to learn video games, what would you say?
I would say, honestly, I would say Mario or Sonic. They're just, they're pretty easy to get the controls for. And when I say Mario or Sonic, I mean the classic ones. I wouldn't give someone Frontiers.
Will immediately jump to Mario. But have you actually thought about how complicated even
probably.
a game as simple as the original Mario is? Sure, the B button's used for running, but only if you hold it down. And good luck getting over those jumps if you're not running and hitting the jump button at the same time. So already we're hitting 2 buttons simultaneously. If that wasn't complicated enough, what about when Mario collects a fire flower? Suddenly that B button is also now used to throw fireballs. Even the way you kill enemies, you have to hop on their heads, which requires control and aim and timing. And if you miss, well, too bad for you. You get hit and you're sent back to the beginning of the stage. There's no easy way to regain that power-up. There's no easy way to recover your health. And again, this is just talking about the first Mario, the simplest and most basic of any of them. In short, learning games, it's hard. Much harder than most of us.
I will say, when I played Sonic Frontiers, all those different moves, all I could say is thank God they had an automatic mode, because there were like 20, 30 moves Sonic could do, and they all had different button combos, so I see the point here.
Realize
I suck at
so
combos
many
in video
smaller
games.
steps in the process that didn't occur to me until recently when I slowly started introducing Ollie to the world of games, which is why this episode exists. I want to give a basic 10-step guide on how to introduce someone, young, old, or otherwise, to the world of gaming. It even comes bundled with a few game introductions along the way. It's not perfect by any means, but it is based on my research and my personal experimentation with Ollie, aka our game time together. And at the very least, it's a good first.
Which is why he's leaving YouTube to have more time with his son, of course.
Been starting a discussion on how to make this world of gaming a bit more open and inclusive to anyone who might be looking to try it. I'd also encourage you, as we go through this 10-step process, to leave a comment down below with your own personal game recommendations or any personal experiences that you or a loved one's had as they've gone through a similar journey.
Super Mario 64. That would be my personal recommendation.
So with all that being said, this one feels appropriate for the intro where we had Mario run across a bunch of video game consoles. What is that, 2012? Roll that one.
I'm trying to correct this. Whatever.
Internet, welcome to Game Theory, the show that's been ruining your gaming childhood for 13 years. So today, I'm going to try to build up a couple of new gaming childhoods. Before, Ollie's just started showing interest in games, which is awesome. But it also puts a lot of pressure on me as a parent to be a good steward for his journey. What games should I have him play first? Should he be starting with the games that I most enjoyed as a kid, or is that going to risk him getting frustrated if they're all too difficult? We can always try kids' games, but from my experience, a lot of those aren't exactly the best entry-level games. Like the recently released Bluey game. It's designed to be baby's first video game experience, and yet it fails as both a game and as a teaching tool.
I'm a little surprised by that. If you saw the reactions I did last week, I was having very fun with the Bluey is magic theory. Yeah.
Speedrunner strat here. Oh, whoa, no, apparently not! So I decided to dig in, do my own research to see what information
I should go back and watch that GT Live.
exists out there.
I'm not reacting to
see just
GT
how many
Lives.
people are having the same question as me. Not just from parents trying to get their kids into gaming, but also adults who never experienced gaming before and were trying to break into the hobby. So today we're creating a step-by-step guide, a curriculum, if you will, on how to go from total noob to totally epic. Crack open a cold bottle of Mountain Dew and let the smell of Doritos waft into the room, my friends. Professor MattPat's in the building, and How to Be a Gamer 101 is now in session. Let's start by walking through my thought process in designing this gamer guide. While researching for this episode, I stumbled across an amazing book called Learn to Play by Dr. Matthew White, a professor whose life work is dedicated to teaching psychology and game design. While the book mostly focuses on teaching game developers how to build better tutorials, there was so much fascinating stuff in here about the psychology of gamers and how people learn that it proved to be an invaluable resource for this particular episode. For instance, when learning something new, be it calculus, a new language, or a new skill, our brains can only really handle so much new information at one time. If we take in too much new information at once, our brains reach what's known as cognitive overload. When you reach that point, almost no new information.
This is why I have burnout whenever I'm editing ski videos, by the way. Probably what's happening to Matt.
It's ever going to transfer over from your short-term memory to your long-term memory. This is the exact reason that scientists don't recommend cramming for a test the night before. The small bits of information may stick around in the short term, but long-term, those memories are going to be wiped clean from your brain the moment that you're done with your test. Therefore, in building our gamer guide, we're going to want to start off with the simplest possible games and then slowly in more and more complexity. I mean, you have to learn to crawl before you can stand, and stand before you can walk, and walk before you can run. So without any further ado, it's time to get into the list. Level 1, touch and motion controls. Kicking off our 10-step video game journey, we're going to start with the simplest controller setup possible, no controller at all. I'm talking about touch screens and
Wheeze. Oh, I didn't want to know that.
the simplest possible games and then slowly mix in more and more complexity. I mean, you have to learn to crawl before you can stand, and stand before you can walk, and walk before you can run. So without any further ado, it's time to get into the list. Level 1, touch and motion controls. Kicking off our 10-step video game journey, we're going to start with the simplest controller setup possible, no controller at all. I'm talking about touch screens and motion controls. You see, the first hurdle that any new gamer is going to have to overcome in building a relationship with gaming is abstraction. The idea that your actions over here in the real world are affecting things over there in the digital world. A controller or keyboard with arbitrary, meaningless buttons, it's very disconnected with what I see happening on a screen. But motion controls help bridge that gap. If I swing my arm and I suddenly see a sword swinging on screen, or if I throw a punch and see the character attack in a similar way, that makes intuitive sense to me.
I know I've never used it, but I do know the PS5 has a motion sensor in it.
And my body. Touchscreens also have a sense of immediate direct feedback, but also come with a slightly different benefit. They don't require dexterity. Holding
Touchscreen on this I have actually used, not in games, but it can be used as a mouse pad.
controllers, hitting buttons, it's precise work that requires trained fine motor skills. But tapping and swiping at a screen is actually much less demanding both cognitively and physically. That being said, I do want to put up a few major red flags here for younger gamers.
It's not with me, but that's true. It is with me, but I can't use it as an example, but I do admit to playing about 100 times more games on my phone than on my PC.
Watch exposure time to all these screens. When it comes to screen time, the American Academy of Pediatrics recommends that children are completely kept away from screens until at least 18 months old, with video calls being the only exception. We all know the horror stories of iPad kids. Personally, for Steph and I, we kept Ollie away from screens for a full 2 years. And when we did eventually open the door, it was only through very heavily curated education-based apps that we controlled for very short periods of time. The Academy recommends no more than 1 hour of screen time per day until the age of 5. We found a lot of success with a daily max of about 30 minutes. As far as games to play, I cannot recommend anything more highly than Khan Academy Kids. It's a free app with educational games ranging from reading to memory to math and 0 microtransactions. There's also individual paths that follow your child's progress based on their skill level in early learning topics. Other honorable mentions here that cover a broader range of ages: the Jigsaw app, which just offers a lot of free puzzles that can be customized to be easy, hard, or anywhere in between. Polygrams, which is a fantastic tangram game provided you pay a couple bucks to get rid of the ads. And lastly, there's the suite of Lucas and Friends apps, which cover everything from puzzles and coloring to math and spelling. Basically, the games don't have to be all that much of games as much as experiences, where tapping a screen drives some form of action. And when it comes to motion controls, I think we're all probably familiar with the winner here, Wii Sports. It is the 4th highest selling game of all time.
When I had a Wii, that was my favorite game to play. I even stopped playing Guitar Hero because I played that a lot.
For a reason.
So
it was
simple,
the
so
pioneer
fun.
and opened up gaming to a new generation, both young and old. Newer titles like 1-2 Switch, yeah, they're okay, but not nearly as good in terms of simple one-to-one gameplay.
I will clarify, my first motion control game was actually the Sony Eye. Is that what it was called? Was the first one called the Eye? I think it was the Eye and the Eye 2. I loved the Eye, where you would go like this. My favorite one was the clean in windows for some reason. And I know a lot of people didn't like the karate one, but that was my second.
I see a thing, I do the thing, it works and
I
makes
was pretty
sense.
good at
Level
it.
2, joystick or D-pad only. Alright, so with the newfound knowledge that you can affect the digital world, it's time to put away the iPads and Wiimotes and move up to the actual controllers. When looking online for recommendations about what age to start someone console gaming, 4 to 6 tends to come up the most. It's around
That's when I
this age
started.
that kids are first able to develop the physical dexterity to do things like buttoning and unbuttoning shirts for themselves, meaning that they should also be able to hold a controller and press a button at the same time. So if your player's old enough to be dressing themselves, then I'd say you should be able to move up to the next level of gaming console. That said, most of today's controllers are going to be way too much for a new gamer protege.
Oh, I didn't mean to do that. Did not mean to do that time.
Kids are first able to develop the physical dexterity to do things like buttoning and unbuttoning shirts for themselves, meaning that they should also be able to hold a controller and press a button at the same time. So if your player's old enough to be dressing themselves, then I'd say you should be able to move up to the next level of gaming console. That said, most of today's controllers are going to be way too much for a new gamer protege to start off with. So it's important that we strip away all of those bells and whistles and just start with a single joystick or D-pad. No buttons. This part of the process is all about mastering how to move in a virtual space. So let's get them comfortable with the idea of controlling a character.
I would argue that you should have a jump button when you start. Move and jump.
On screen with a physical
And a hit
stick.
button.
When it came to
Move,
reaching
jump,
this
and hit,
milestone
I
in our
would
house,
say.
we found a lot of success with the Super Monkey Ball series.
Like even today, I always program it so that the 2 primary buttons are my X button and my circle button and moving around. That's why I hold my controller this way. Actually, I lied. The hit button is the square for me, because I hold my thumb like this. So like I got jump, I got hit, and then secondary hit, and then whatever the tertiary hit is up here, move. And I know this is like the camera. So I would say 2 buttons. You need to jump, a hit, and movement.
Kids are already used to rolling balls and aiming things into goals, so the concept literally needs no explanation. Add to that a complete lack of dialogue and cute monkey characters, and you've got yourself a winning formula. Of all the titles in the franchise, I highly recommend Super Monkey Ball 3D for the 3DS because it's forgiving. Later Monkey Ball titles have the difficulty ramp up fairly quickly, but in Super Monkey Ball 3D, there are guardrails in place throughout almost the entire game, helping to ensure that your new gamer is able to experience a lot of success quickly with minimal amounts of frustration.
But I
And
got
that's
a
gonna be a nice
DS.
segue to the next major hurdle and a huge point of frustration, adding a button.
3DS,
Level
I mean.
3, joystick plus 1 button with only 1 function, 2D, no lose state. Alright, next up on the journey, it's time to bring in that first button, which might not seem like a big deal to us, but it is to a new gamer. Moving while jumping or attacking, that is a big milestone. I cannot tell you the amount of times that I've watched kids die on that first Goomba in the original Mario. To us, it seems super easy, right? But to most early gamers, that thing might as well be a final boss. To jump over it, you need timing, timing, precision, and
When I
worst of
started
all,
Mario, I knew what
multiple
jumping
buttons.
was
And nothing can kill your
because of
enthusiasm
Sonic.
for playing a game quite like hitting a wall, or in this case, a slow-moving Goomba, which is why we not.
I will say my first game was Sonic, and I knew 2 buttons. I knew the move, the jump, and I, shockingly enough, did figure out the spin button in like my second playthrough.
We need a one-button 2D game here, but also one with no fail states. This is a huge skill jump, which means that we need a safe space to explore and play without the game punishing us for making mistakes. Now, admittedly, licensed games tend not to be the best, but Paw Patrol on a Roll is a perfect example for this step of the learning process. It is literally a 2D side-scroller where you practice platforming. Sure, there are collectible bones and medallions floating around to encourage you to search, but nothing is...
I don't think these no-lose games existed when I was a kid.
Mandatory for completion. And most importantly of all, there are no enemies to hit or pits to fall into. It is purely a game about you versus the platforms, as you get familiar with moving throughout a 2D virtual space. Best of all the dialogue in the game is spoken, which makes it perfect for any young gamer who's still learning to read. There are a couple of moments where you have to push another button for a special event, but these moments aren't time sensitive, so it's already starting to build an...
And you can't see it there, but it clearly has square, triangle, circle, left to right. So it also displays, and like even to this day I still appreciate this, when there was like a quick time event, what am I supposed to hit? So it still displays the buttons.
Of the wider controller with 0 pressure. Level number 4, joystick with 1 button and only 1 function, 3-dimensional.
Well, that wasn't quick time, though.
Having mastered moving through a 2-dimensional space, makes sense to upgrade to moving through a 3-dimensional space. Same rules apply here. You're looking for something where 1 button does 1 thing and 1 thing only, and no fail state. And once again, Ryder and the gang knock it out of the park with their licensed game, Paw Patrol Mighty Pup Save Adventure Bay. It is the exact same concept as the 2D game, but now in 3 dimensions with a fixed camera. This opens the new challenges of up and down controls as well as gauging jump distances. Just from the opening level alone, you can see how it's step-by-step training gamers how to leap over things like nets and run up and down ramps. Now again, obviously not every new gamer is going to be super excited to save Adventure Bay of all places. I wouldn't expect that. But again, I use this as a great model to follow when looking for a game to use with your gamer. Something welcoming where the focus is purely on movement and getting to an end goal. Level 5, joystick plus 1 button with only 1 function, 2D lose states. Alright, so now that we've conquered the obstacle of moving and jumping in both 2D and 3D spaces, we can now start mixing in real obstacles and enemies.
Again, I disagree. I still think that there should be a 2 button.
You know, the things that are meant to impede our progress. Now remember what I mentioned earlier about Mario. We want a game where 1 button does 1 thing, and that thing should stay consistent pretty much the entire time. Essentially, we're looking for a game that's purely about running and jumping, but now with a few more obstacles. And there is no game that fits this mantra better than our favorite blue blur, Sonic the Hedgehog. Specifically the Sonic Origins collection. You see,
again, I did figure out the spin on my second playthrough. However, it's not completely necessary as long as you've got that jump button.
There are 2 brilliant things about...
And when you attack the enemy, like when you attack Eggman, you literally just jump on them. It's just about where.
That really make him stand out for this part of our training. The first is that in 1 button press, you are both jumping and attacking at the same time.
Just what I said.
Into a spin ball. Unlike Mario, who's always vulnerable and has to land on an enemy's head to defeat it, by jumping, Sonic is not only moving, he also has a chance of killing whatever he touches. Secondly, Sonic's ring system is a game changer. Rings are plentiful, and as long as you can quickly scoop up one more ring, you're good to go. There's no searching for more life, no need for extra power-ups. As long as you prioritize getting that ring after getting hit, you are practically invincible. That said, obviously Sonic games tend to get fast, and that makes them hard. But that also...
That's even true in Frontiers, I will say. As long as you got that 1 ring. Frontiers, later in the game, you have to have a certain amount of rings to go supersonic. It's 400 to go supersonic. Like, I constantly maintain that, and that can be a little annoying, but as long as you got 1 ring, you aren't dying.
Gives new gamers a sense of momentum and forward progress. It's exciting to hit those springs and go through those ramps. And over time, their reaction speeds are going to pick up. The biggest hurdle of Sonic, honestly, are the Dr. Robotnik bosses. But again, Sonic's team has a solution in the form of one of my favorite gaming characters of all time, Tails. Tails is invincible, so as long as you take control over Sonic and just avoid the boss while hoping to recover the lost rings, it gives your new gamer a chance to practice against a big bad with less...
In Sonic the Hedgehog 3, I actually played as Tails only to challenge myself, not as Sonic.
frustration, and beating a boss on their own, that feels like a big achievement for their gaming journey, boosting confidence immediately. This is honestly how Ollie's been able to beat the entirety of Sonic's 2 and 3 almost by himself at this point. As an extra bonus for the Origins collection, it does away with lives and continues, allowing your new gamers to focus on practice.
Did he also beat the secret level that I didn't know existed as a child?
Getting better as opposed to tedious progress loss. Level 6, joystick plus one button with multiple functions. Now this is the phase of the journey where we're currently at, and it's here that we face an important choice. Do we add another button, or do we add in multiple functions for our one button? According to studies done on individuals with limited mobility, multi-use one-button controls tend to yield better results, so that's what we're going to be focusing on. For that, we're going to move on to everyone's favorite racing game, Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. Now immediately this one should be ringing some alarm bells. One look at the control scheme for Mario Kart, and you realize it's going to take more than one button. There's acceleration, braking, drifting, steering, and what...
I'll explain why I think you should have 2 buttons real quick. I think you should really get used to that finger movement for the more complex controllers. And I still to this day hate buttons with double functions, with the exception of a button with a double jump, but that's just jump, jump. I hate multifunction buttons. Still to this day. I would really argue against that one, Matt.
Yeah, the base settings in Mario Kart, forcing you to do all those things by yourself. Mario Kart 8 added accessibility settings, allowing new players to enjoy the game with the auto accelerate feature. This allows new players to solely focus on steering the car and throwing items. Considering different items for different things, this all helps build in that strategic aspect of resources at the optimal.
But then you can't control acceleration. What if you don't want to go full speed?
That comes up in a whole host of other games. One of the other things that I love about Mario Kart as a game for this particular part of the player journey is that you can very precisely dial in the difficulty both through track selection and by adjusting level. And the rubber banding AI in the game, which scales to your performance, ensures that any new gamer is never truly out of a race getting lapped. Again, limiting their frustration and humiliation and last place finishes. Level 7, joystick plus 2 buttons, only one at a time. Finally, we're getting to the level of the original Nintendo Entertainment System from way back in the 1980s. It is here that we introduce the B button. Yeah, it only took us 7 steps. Again, because this is yet another big leap, we want to focus on the games that only require...
If you're using a PlayStation, you don't want to introduce the B button, which would be the circle. You want to introduce the square. Trust me on that.
Player to press each button one at a time. While you or I may be able to handle holding the B button to run while using the other half of our thumb to press the A button, a new gamer, they won't have that dexterity yet. Instead, they need a slower paced game with
I will say in the case of the PlayStation, yeah, you'd actually be holding down the trigger button to run in most games. And like trigger and jump with this and move. So, yeah, maybe PlayStation is not the best place to start after all.
Built-in time to focus on where the buttons are and how to switch between them. For that, there are 2 great routes here. Option 1, most top-down Legend of Zelda games. These games allow you to see the enemies around you and choose whether or not you're going to engage, which allows gamers to proceed at their own pace. Additionally, in many of these, your sword is permanently mapped onto one button while the other rotates in function based on the item you have equipped. The original Zelda is obviously the simplest and has the benefit of not requiring a lot of reading skill to complete, but also it's one of the more challenging entries. From my perspective, A Link to the Past is a personal favorite, where they refined the top-down formula perfectly, but didn't start adding in a lot of bells and whistles like in later games. And even if you can't get through the entire quest, just taking the time to roam around, slash at the bushes, destroy some pots, it is rewarding enough.
Never beat it, but I still love that game.
Is Overcooked. If you somehow haven't seen this game before, it's a co-op cooking game where you and up to 3 friends are chefs at a restaurant, and you need to cook together to prepare the ingredients, cook the food, and serve hungry.
I just noticed that's this theory vision right there.
Customers. The game starts off pretty easy, but as you go on, the levels start to get more frantic. But notably, the controls are as simple as one button to chop and throw, and another to pick up and drop things. The cooperative nature of the game also helps to improve communication skills. And as a last bonus, if your new gamer is struggling with the orders, you can always take on more of the workload yourself so you can make progress while everyone feels like they're helping. Also, just as an honorable mention here, we have Pokemon. You see, there's one major thing to consider when we start introducing kids to games, especially RPGs, and that's reading. Everyone's going to be different when it comes to their reading ability. If your new gamer is one of those kids who burns through chapter books like there's no tomorrow, then this might not be that big of an issue. But generally speaking, it's not until ages 7 or 8 that children get a high enough reading level to reach basic literacy. And when it comes to reading to...
Maybe it's a brag, but I was playing Pokemon at level 8, and while I never beat the Elite Four, I got there and it was either the first 2 or 3 people. and I understood the strategy. It's just as a kid, and honestly, early in my teenage years, I got bored with the game really quick. I didn't have that sort of sense of completion until my later teen years, when I started actually beating the Sonic games and the Pokemon games. And like, if you go back, I've kind of given up on the final DLC of Sonic Frontiers, but I did get to the original end boss.
New skills or gain
And I
information,
beat
all the
Hogwarts
kind of stuff
Legacy.
that you get in an
I beat the
RPG that
Ramrock
doesn't
Dragon.
normally develop until the age of at least 9. If you're there, Pokemon is perfect. Simple menuing, cute characters, and a basic button layout that makes this the ideal gamer's first RPG.
But
Level 8,
strategy.
joystick plus 2 buttons, 2 at a time. Now comes step 8, where we're going to add in the need to press and hold multiple buttons at the same time. And guess what we're finally ready for, friends? Super Mario Brothers. Yeah, I'm just as shocked that Mario is so late on this journey as you are. But as I mentioned earlier, not only are the buttons doing different things depending on what power-up Mario has, but straddling multiple buttons at once to make precise jumps, it requires advanced dexterity and spatial awareness that only follows all the other skills that we've built up so far. Level 9, joystick, and 3 or more buttons, no camera control. Loyal theorists, we're in the home stretch. We've done 1 button. We've done 2 buttons. Obviously, it's time to add a 3rd and more. But more importantly than all of that, at this point, we have to stay aware.
This might be the time to introduce the PlayStation controller, because I truly believe with the PlayStation controller you need 3 buttons. You need the X, you need the square, you need the circle, and the one of the joysticks. With pretty much every PlayStation game. To this day, those are the most important. Like, even I'm gaming on my PC, but I use a PS5 controller. Those are always the most important. Hogwarts Legacy, I always put my 3 important spells on this, and this, and I always had a backup spell on the triangle.
Camera control. You see, adding the second stick into the mix to control the camera is the last major control hurdle that we're going to have to overcome, and it is a doozy. It seems like the vast majority of games today, especially your big AAA first-person shooters and third-person action games, require you to be able to metaphorically walk and chew gum at the same time. Having your thumbs control both your player and the camera simultaneously is one thing, but with every change you make with the camera on your right thumb, it significantly changes the way that your character moves with your left thumb. It is essentially like controlling 2 different characters at the same time. In fact, Mario 64, the first truly successful 3D platformer, literally made the camera its own character, Lakitu, to help bridge the idea in players' minds that these games were going to require new skills. There are plenty of gamers out there who really stopped playing newer games due to not being able to wrap their heads around new camera controls.
When I was in high school, when this first came out, like, I remember seeing it like on display at like an electronics store and just being like totally overwhelmed.
So before we add in that second stick, let's just do ourselves a final game with more buttons in a 3D space where the camera work's done for us. I recommend Super Mario 3D World. It has all the challenges of the 3D games that'll come later, but without overwhelming you with camera controls. Level 10, 2 joysticks. And so we've arrived. The final step, adding in a second stick. And it's here where everything comes together. The multiple buttons that do all the things at different times, 3D and with fully controllable cameras, lose states, precision, and a place to learn without being at a Soulsborne level of difficulty. For this, I have 2 recommendations. The first is a game franchise that only recently relinquished the camera to the player, and one that's near and dear to my heart, Pokemon. Pokemon Sword and Shield, but especially Legends Arceus, are Pokemon's first foray into the world of 3D camera controls, and as a result, they've made it as accessible.
I have not played the new Pokemon games. I've only played the Game Boy ones.
As possible. For
Platinum
someone that's a
was
bit
the
more
one I beat,
intensive though,
and
we
then
have
said,
Super
no.
Mario Odyssey. Is Super Mario Odyssey the hardest game that ever existed? No. In fact, the platforming is much more forgiving than past titles like 64 and Galaxy. But you see, that's entirely the point. Our goal here isn't to go from zero to hero. Our goal is to give new players a taste of what makes gaming so fun without bogging them down with years of assumed knowledge that us experienced gamers just know intuitively. And then with that,
I would also say Galaxy is easier than 64. I did beat Galaxy too.
solid baseline, everything from there just ramps on up. The speed of play, it increases. The intricacy
Before
of
it
the
beat
controls, it
64,
just gets harder. The complexity
actually.
of the movement, the platforms get smaller, whatever. And so there you have it, folks, your 10-step guide to get someone started into the wonderful world of video games. A few quick final thoughts as we wrap things up. First and foremost, be patient. This is learning, and like any learning, it's going to take time. There's going to be forward progress, but there's also going to be steps backward as well.
Yeah.
It's also worth noting that if one game doesn't click,
That's true.
Let's try a different one. If you're struggling to find recommendations for games to play, commonsensemedia.org and familygamingdatabase.com both have great tools that allow you to search for games on the consoles you have based on things like age, genre, and even the complexity of the control.
And actually promote gaming instead of railing against it.
So really, for all the overthinking and analysis that we've done here today, here's a little test that you can use to know whether or not you're doing a good job at teaching a new player how to play a video game. Are they having fun? If so, you're doing exactly what you need to do. But hey, that's just a theory. A game theory. Thanks for watching.
So, I think this is actually a case where I'm gonna make a couple of disagreements, MattPat, if you see this. Again, I guess maybe it depends on where you start, but I'm gonna follow up this reaction with my own personal experience. First game, Sonic. Yeah, Sega Genesis, 3-button controller, very simple 3-button controller. This is not a Sega Genesis controller, but like, to use this as an example, just pretend there's no triangle button. Pretend it's the square, the X, and the circle. I know that like the X would be the one button there, but like, yeah, the one button that did the jump in, yeah, the 2 button that did the rolls. It is a little more honestly complex than this. No camera to worry about with the Sonic game. It is kind of a die situation, but when I started playing Sonic, it was either 5 or 6, the first Sonic game, I did pick it up quick. So like maybe I'm a natural gamer, I guess, not a professional one, but I picked it up quick. Took me time to master it. Same thing with my skiing, actually. I picked skiing up quick. Boy, did it take me a long time to master it, but yeah, I can see the point to just having run and jump, but I really think that if you want to get into gaming fast, I think that in addition to the button, if you want to be in a scenario where there's no death, like some of the games you brought up, fine, I do kind of agree with that, but I honestly believe if you're playing a death game, then yeah. I can't say that. I know. I get that little kids are little kids, but at age 5, I was already dealing with 3 buttons. My Sega Genesis controller, I figured it out. Did I use all 3 all the time? No. I knew the go-to was the jump button. Sonic is a great example. Jump button. And I didn't have to hit the spin button all the time. I was consistently using the jump button. If I ever felt like I had to spin, like if there were some spots where spin really helped, I guess that would be the circle button on a PlayStation controller. I moved on from Genesis to I did do Super Mario Brothers, and I was actually bored by it. Yes, I was actually bored by it because it was just run and jump, and I don't know, maybe it was the 2D thing. Or that I honestly didn't play it that much. When I moved on to the Nintendo 64, now Mario became a great game. I made it all the way to the final Bowser. Just unfortunately, my short attention span as a child, and I did not have this completionist attitude. I never completed it, but I think, I want to say it was 90-something stars. I just never beat that final Bowser, which I did go back, and I did go back on the Wii, the first Wii, and I played it virtually. I played the virtual game, but I did buy, just for the heck of it, the Wii's had the ports for controllers. I did actually buy a Nintendo 64 controller, and I did use the Nintendo 64 controller to beat the game. And I had a PS3 at the same time. So that was a single. And the N64 controller only has one movement. It didn't have a second thing, and but it did have the 4 buttons. It had the jump, and again, this comes into the 2 thing. It had the jump, and they didn't actually have it. So I would say N64 is ready. And camera movement was that. Now that I say that, camera movement for that was actually the triangle buttons they have. To this day, I still don't really use the triangle buttons. I had to use it in Hogwarts Legacy. You have to hold the trigger over here and select. Got to select. Well, that was complicated because you actually had to. Oh no, Hogwarts Legacy, you didn't have to hold the trigger. Set of spells you had, like, I generally that I used. I had down for attack, and then I had like a functional one. Once I unlocked like all different 4 spell sets, so that is a little more complex. So I would definitely say, if I had to make my own list, I would say Sonic. I would say go to Mario 64 because while it is possible to die in Mario 64, MattPat did bring up, like, there's that whole world to run around and test things out. Whenever I start a new game, I go hardcore into playing the game. Like, same thing with Sonic Frontiers. I was definitely getting around the field, jump, what does this button do, what does that button do, looking at button confirmations. And the reason I'm still not a pro is I actually had, and I will give Sonic Frontiers credit for this, they actually had an auto combo. Now, when I added some of the combos later and had auto combo on, it would not always give you the best combo. Speed wise, that's why it took me so long that's why I haven't gone back to the speed running, because you have to get lucky and you have to hit the buttons correctly for the auto combo to give you the right combo, and if you have to hit it too fast, it's going to do one of the wrong ones. Hit it slow, it won't do it. Yeah, Frontiers is one of the more complex games. Like, I honestly think you would probably be better off. That's why I haven't actually yet another Sonic game that I guess I can't say I've completed because of that new DLC. I completed the original portion of it. I beat the end. I have videos of that. It was actually fairly easy. I S-ranked the boss rush on Kronos Island after a long time of playing it. But, you know, I was a PS2 guy. Before I bought the Wii, I was a PS2 guy. I was playing games like, what was the first game I ever beat on PS2? Before that, the Dreamcast, yeah, I beat Sonic 1 and 2, except the secret bosses, because I honestly didn't know there were secret bosses. Oh no, I never beat Big on Sonic 1, that's why the secret boss never unlocked. I got to the secret boss on Sonic Adventure 2, and that's when I found out that these games had secret bosses. Yeah. I never beat the secret boss. I was still not a good gamer at that point. It was PlayStation 2 where I started actually beating games. And I don't know, maybe I'm just, like, even gaming here. Like, my brother had an Xbox. I couldn't stand having my hands like this on a diagonal. I want my hands like this, able to move both. I love games where I move with one and move the camera with the other one. I've gotten really good at camera movement. I've gotten really. I love the newer controllers with, like, the little rest on them for your thumbs. PS5 has. And the PS5 controller, let me just tell you, it behaves a lot more than the PS4 controller did with the, what do you call it? But I would say there are some games out there for the PlayStation where 2 buttons is usable, you know, jump. He was showing one that had, like, the 3 buttons, but not all the time. Again, I would argue when I say 2 buttons, that's what I mean. I mean, like, you need your move button, your jump button. And I would say you do need some form of an action button when you're getting started. Like, Mario 64 would actually be an example of where the jump button is a multi-function button. You got jump, you got double jump, and you got that triple jump, flip jump, whatever you want to call it. But even then, you needed a grab button for Bowser's tail. There was an action button there. And I would argue if you want to get into it fast, I don't know. Maybe it's because I didn't start gaming when I was 2 or 3. I started gaming. Earliest was age 4. Let's think about this. One of the other Sega games I played was a shooting game that my dad was honestly my dad's. I'm not joking. He had one game, and it was a shooting game that I think my grandpa got for him because he was in the Air Force, and I tried it a couple times. I didn't understand it, and that was also a strategy game where you that I think that did use the, but I never tried it. I think that did use a certain like sort of camera mechanic, which when you don't have a camera button on the Sega Genesis was hard. I didn't understand you had to. I figured out towards the end, and when I actually started shooting enemy planes down, that there were enemy planes out there that you had to go search around for and shoot and aim. So that was honestly probably the hardest game I played, and I stressed out about it a lot. And when I realized how it worked, that was like the big moment where I was like, oh, okay. And even though I didn't beat Mario 64 the first time I played it, I did get all the way to the final Bowser. And that was honestly the game where I started figuring out like the triple jumps and the movement. And granted, the camera movement was with the arrows then, but I would use the different camera movements. I would say it was the Sonic the Adventure game when I actually started really caring about gaming because I forgot what the control of the Dreamcast was like. Was that only a one button? But to this day, my go-to for training people would be give them a movement, give them the jump button, and I would argue that even when you're starting out, you do want some sort of an action button. Whether it's the square or the triangle, if you're starting out on here, you know. Shooters. Shooters was actually what I got the PlayStation 2 for. Yeah, you could move the camera, and I did it a little bit, but I mostly used the move button. Yeah, I had the X button, which was the jump button. That introduced the trigger to me, the shoot button. In my early days, I would always map the one button to the shoot button because I didn't want to use this. And then I slowly found out you need that to be your grenade button. So I would have like the grenade button, and then I would have like the shoot button. And whenever I wanted to shoot, I would have like I know some people use the L1, I use the R1 to focus. So like, okay, focus, shoot. And you had like the manual aim, which I didn't use much. I think the big thing for me was like, I want those options, you know. They're not the ones I'm going to use all the time, but I want those options. I'm still a simple gamer to now. As I said earlier, move. You know, I have this. I have your primary action. I have a secondary action, which I do use the secondary action a lot now. And then I have another action here on the triangle button. But I like games where this is my hold style with the PlayStation 5 controller. Thumb here, grip it, fingers ready here if I need to. I will say there are games where I still favor the R1, where I'll actually rest my right thumb on this instead. Those are usually the games where they won't let you change the controller. But I never do this. It's always either this or this, and never this. Unless it's a shooter game where sometimes, depending on the shooter game, I'll actually make this the focus button instead of this the focus button. Man, I'm just shooting myself in the foot. I'm trying to defend the 2 or 3 button as the start setup, but I'm going to just keep shooting myself in the foot with examples of why that's not the right thing to do. I just proving MattPat's point that you shouldn't start that way? I don't know. I don't like the idea of, honestly, to this day, I still don't like the idea of motion games. Touch games, sure. Touch games, I play them all the time on my phone. They're addictive. I like simple puzzle games on my phone. But when I want to actually game, I want two buttons. I won't buy a game unless it consistently uses two buttons move. Now I want that camera to be an option. Not mandated, but an option. I don't really use these. Again, even in Hogwarts Legacy, they were just used to choose my spell set. I appreciate that. I don't like, I will say this, that I think is complex. Hogwarts Legacy, to cast a spell, you didn't just hit one of these buttons. You had to actually, because this was cast, you actually had to hold down one of the buttons and hit cast. That I don't agree with. Which is part of the reason why I refused to use the more than 4 spells at a time. When I got the second one, I would use 8 spells. Like, you go see my game. I wasn't the best player of Hogwarts Legacy. I beat it, but I wasn't the best player. Like my Ramrock Dragon. Like, if you see me play against the Ramrock Dragon, oh, how many times did I die? I wish I could go back and do that second time. Meanwhile, you look at me playing Sonic Frontiers, and I was able to S-rank the first island. I've gotten a lot better than I was a kid. But I guess maybe now I do come from a different time. I do come from a time where my introduction was Sonic and the Genesis, and I never had like the easy game to start me out. Touchscreen games didn't exist. I'm young, but not that young. Touchscreen games might have existed, but they weren't commonplace. I didn't have a cell phone as a kid. Like, cell phones were still business only. My dad had one for his business. My mom didn't have one. I didn't have one until I was a teenager, young preteen. Like, I had heard about them now, and I had played Snake on my dad's phone. Snake's a good game to start with, actually. I love Snake. I was really good at Snake, just using the arrow buttons on my dad's. He didn't have Nokia. What did he have? My mom got the Nokia. My first phone was no. My first phone was it a Nokia? It was so long ago. My first phone didn't even have a camera. My second phone had a camera. My third phone had video. Oh boy. So I don't know. I will say it also depends on the person. Well, this video went pretty long. I did react to it quite a bit. I was actually very opinionated in this video. Huh. I will say this is one of the first theories. Well, not the one of the first theories. One of the first theories in a while where I actually disagreed with the MattPat approach. I know he's using research, and maybe that's the way it works for his child. But personally, I would say you want movement and 2 buttons. Jump button and an action button when you get started. It's a fast track. Maybe it's not the easiest way, but it's the fastest way to get good. And if you're doing shooters, you're going to want a trigger button as well.